For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sashnee Moodley. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Hi, Professor.
Hi.
There seems to be a flurry of activity on the side of the Hawks and the NPA, with some controversial investigations and prosecutions. What is your view?
Yeah, look, let's just put it in a context of us being 25 years, 21 years into democracy, or 22 years into democracy. One would have hoped by now that law enforcement would have democratic characteristics conforming to the Constitution, and the sense of fear that we had for the police and for law enforcement under apartheid, one would have hoped that this was no more. In Britain, for example, it may have changed, but you have had some abuse by police. But in general, the imagery that one has of the police whom one sees in the streets is of people whom you can go over to and say, sorry, I'm lost, can you help me? How do I get to this place or that place? And the problem that you have had always in South Africa is that the police are associated with, they evoke fear. They're associated with violence. If a police car screeches in front of you, you don't know what is going to happen, legally or illegally. And the problem is that that has continued into the present. And it has continued in the ordinary police, where you've had extrajudicial executions, among other things, illegal harassment of foreign Africans, etc., etc., etc. But now what we're seeing is a special investigative unit known as the Hawks, who are engaged in various activities which are downright intimidatory, in so far as the involvement of General Mklemeza in his engagements with the Minister of Finance. I mean, how can a head of a police unit write a threatening letter to a minister? We also have a number of other problems. But it's not just the police. We have a situation where the National Prosecuting Unit is actually discredited. And this man, Sean Abrams, when he came to head it, he came in and people said, oh, well, it's good. We've got a professional prosecutor coming to head it. But no sooner had he done that then charges of perjury and other charges were withdrawn from his deputy, Jibba. And it is alleged by Willie Hofmeyr that this decision and other decisions were not made as Abrams suggested by a prosecutor on the job, that the charges didn't hold, but Abrams himself was involved in this. We also see the other day that Abrams made a statement at an organized crime conference where he remarked of the student protests that there's some third force type thing behind them. Now that is what some political figures are saying. Now you don't expect a professional prosecutor to be echoing things like this, because when you say that protests are not protests but they're actually instigated by some other people, what you really are doing is saying ignore the reasons for whatever has been damaged. Just look at the damage and charge them with the damage and find who put them up to it. In other words, that way of reasoning is one that ignores the social causes. And those social causes are actually recognized by the government, and they're also recognized by the principals, the vice chancellors of the various universities that have been damaged. They recognize, they don't agree with everything the students are doing, but they recognize that it's not just a case of them being put up to it by people who are against the government of the day. So we have these trends that we can recognize from before, and my hope, I was a person who broke the law under apartheid, and I didn't have respect for certain laws of the South African state. But after 1994, especially after the new constitution of 1996, I believe that legality is linked to our freedom. Defense of legality is the front line of defense of our democracy. And if the police and the prosecuting authority are diverting from this in the way they prosecute, who they don't prosecute, then they themselves at the top are undermining our freedom. Also, something else that's quite important is that South Africa is a very macho country. The models of masculinity that we have are rough, tough men. And this feeds into gender-based violence. And insofar as the police are the role models for very many people, because a lot of young people want the job they go for is the police. When that model is a violent model, it has implications going beyond crime.
And what exactly is going on with the Hawks and the MPA and the various charges and investigations against General Dramat, IPID and Praveen Gordhan?
Well, there's a number of cases that the NPA has reinstated or initiated recently. For example, they reinstated charges against General Boyson in KZN, and the charge sheet is exactly the same as the one that was thrown out by the High Court some months ago. And it seems, and if I remember correctly, the court in that case said that Jiba had acted improperly, etc., etc. It seems that the reason for going for Boyson may have been that he was investigating some business people who were close to some political figures. Now, with regard to General Dramat, you'll recall that General Dramat was allegedly involved in the rendition, handing over of Zimbabweans to Zimbabwe, and some of these people were executed or tortured to death and what have you. Now, according to our law, you're not allowed to hand over some person to another country where the death penalty exists. Now, IPID under Robert McBride found that this was not the case, and he was suspended on the basis that he altered a report. Now, what McBride said is that there is a very legitimate practice that before you have a final report, you have a number of drafts. And by the time you move from the draft to the final report, your conclusion may change substantially because some facts you didn't have before, or some understandings you alter because you can see this is not reasonable proof, and so forth. Anyway, Dramat, you will recall, didn't want to have continuous litigation, and he left, was paid out something, but now they've charged him and General Sabia. But it emerges in the affidavit of one of the accused in the McBride case, and a former head of IPID, I think in Limpopo, Kubu, that he was contacted when he was busy, when he was working for IPID on this case. First indirectly, but then directly by General Mklemeza. And they were, General Mklemeza let it be known that he was in touch with General Moodley, who you'll recall was a suspended crime intelligence boss who Dramat was investigating. And Kubu, this person who's telling the story, was suspended, but what Mklemeza and the person acting on behalf of Mklemeza assured him that if he looks after things, he will, they will reinstate him. And they also indicated to him that Mklemeza was expected to become head of IPID, but then later he said Dramat is going to go and he is going to become head of Hawks, which Mklemeza did do. Now, apart from anything else, criminal intelligence is supposed to be quite to have no contact with IPID, no cooperation with IPID over cases which appears to have happened, because IPID is an independent body and it investigates criminal intelligence amongst others. There are a lot of irregularities that are coming out in this case. But since we don't have a lot of time, let me also deal with Gordhan. We have seen that the Hawks sent 27 questions to the minister, gave him a date by which he was expected to reply. When the minister said he needs to know on what legal basis they're doing this, they haven't supplied an answer and they threatened him. Now, it appears that, according to Pierre de Force, who's written an article on his blog, which is probably in the Daily Maverick as well, it appears that the minister is not obliged to answer these questions. They only, as a crime investigating unit, they only have the right to investigate a crime. Now, the supposed investigation is into what is called a rogue investigating intelligence capacity unit of SARS. The evidence shows that this was lawfully established under the period when Trevor Manuel was Minister of Finance. And there's no real basis for claiming that it's a so-called rogue unit, but in any case, it's completely out of order for them to send this threatening order, letter, ultimatums, all these things to the minister. So we come back to what I was saying in the beginning. We wanted to break with the new constitution, with the democratic order. We want to break with the policing and prosecuting practices of the past, which were aimed at instilling fear in citizens, instilling fear in those who were trying to do things that would benefit democracy. Now, insofar as Dramat was trying to investigate organized crime, insofar as the Minister of Finance has been trying to ensure stability for the economy, this intervention of the Hawks is actually going to destabilize those efforts. And one has to ask whether the background is not how Gordhan came to become minister, and that there's not perhaps still resentment at the fact that the president was forced to withdraw his appointment of Van Rooyen. Now, this is, to me, a very important issue, because we want a society where people do not live in fear. We want to put that behind us. That's why this is very important.
Thanks for speaking with us, Professor.
Thank you.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about the abuse of law enforcement agencies.